The Russian army is hemorrhaging soldiers at a rate that defies comprehension. For every single square kilometer of Ukrainian soil Moscow claims to hold, it now pays with 247 human lives, 247 sons, 247 families destroyed, 247 futures extinguished for a patch of earth that will be recaptured within weeks. Why? Because General Mudd has reported for duty. The spring thaw that was supposed to liberate Russian armor from winter paralysis has instead delivered something far worse: a sucking, bottomless quagmire that is swallowing Putin's war machine whole. Russian soldiers have been unable to overcome the earth itself in either Donbass or the Southern Front, and they are losing this war not to bullets alone, but to the land beneath their boots. Mud and meltwater have become their prison wardens. Tens of thousands of Russian forces across a 1,200-kilometer front share an identical fate: immobilized, unsupplied, and abandoned by a command structure that views them as entries in a ledger rather than human beings. Why are we still here? Russian soldiers whisper this question into the frozen mud of their collapsing trenches. They cannot answer it. But you will understand shortly. Look closely at the images emerging from the front lines, and the reason for this existential crisis becomes impossible to ignore. The drone footage arriving from the Zaporizhzhia-Donetsk corridor captures a scene that military historians will study for generations. In a waterlogged tree line south of Huliaipol, a cluster of Russian soldiers sits motionless in ankle-deep brown water that has flooded their fighting positions overnight. The spring melt arrived 3 weeks earlier than seasonal averages, and it arrived with vengeance. A Ukrainian reconnaissance drone hovers at 400 meters, its camera recording every detail of this slow-motion disintegration with clinical precision. The soldiers are not fighting. They are not moving. They are waiting. At the end of this wait lies nothing but cold, wet darkness. But what if we told you that these soldiers are actually the fortunate ones? Yes, it is painful, but it is the truth. The men visible in this footage are wearing modern waterproof field gear, equipment issued to units attached to Russia's 58th Combined Arms Army, one of the better supplied formations in theater. What about Putin's other victims? The conscripts pulled from Siberian villages under the February 2026 Reserve Training Decree have equipment that consists of canvas boots from Soviet-era stockpiles. Cotton field jackets designed for parade grounds, not combat. Some units operating in the Kupiansk sector have been photographed wearing civilian rubber boots purchased from local hardware stores. Rubber boots in a combat zone in the army of a nuclear superpower. General Mudd has not only trapped Russian infantry in waterlogged positions, it has consumed the very instruments of Russian military doctrine, the armored fist that was supposed to punch through Ukrainian lines and deliver decisive victory. Across the southern and eastern fronts, the images tell an identical story. Russia's most prized main battle tanks, the T-90M Proryev, the T-80BVM, and the modernized T-72B3, are sinking into the Ukrainian earth. Not metaphorically, literally. Satellite imagery analyzed by open-source intelligence communities shows at least 14 documented instances in March 2026 alone of Russian armored vehicles becoming irretrievably mired in terrain that was frozen solid just 6 weeks earlier. A T-90M, Russia's most advanced production tank, valued at approximately $4.5 million, was photographed tilted at a 30-degree angle in a muddy ravine southeast of Orikhiv, its tracks spinning uselessly, its crew nowhere to be seen. These vehicles were designed for rapid armored maneuver across the European steppe. They were engineered to exploit speed and mass, but speed requires traction, and traction requires solid ground. The Rasputitsa, that ancient seasonal curse of Eastern European warfare, has eliminated both. Russian tank formations that could theoretically advance at 45 kilometers per hour on hard ground are now measuring their progress in meters per day. Some have stopped moving entirely. But the paralysis extends far beyond the tanks themselves. The logistics arteries sustaining Russia's forward positions have become death traps. Supply convoys traveling unpaved roads, and in this theater the majority of secondary supply routes are unpaved, are bogging down within kilometers of their departure points. Fuel tankers designed for highway transport are sinking to their axles. Ammunition trucks are being abandoned in mud so deep that recovery vehicles cannot reach them. And above all of this, watching with tireless electronic eyes, Ukrainian drones maintain their constant vigil. Every stalled convoy, every stuck tank, every abandoned vehicle becomes a target. Ukrainian artillery units, fed coordinates by drone operators in real time, are converting Russian logistical paralysis and thunders into systematic destruction. A stuck vehicle is not just an inconvenience, it is a fixed target with zero evasive capability. The consequence is mathematically precise and devastating. The Russian army, which currently maintains over 710,000 active personnel in the Ukrainian theater, is being forced to wait, helpless, exposed, and increasingly desperate, across a front line that stretches from Zaporizhzhia in the south to Kupiansk in the northeast. Putin's soldiers feel this helplessness in every waterlogged trench, every flooded bunker, every engine that turns over and produces nothing but a spray of brown water. However, on the other side of the front line, the picture could not be more different. When President Volodymyr Zelensky appeared before cameras on March 15th, the backdrop behind him was not a bunker. It was Kyiv, functioning, illuminated, and defiant. A capital city that Russian missiles have failed to darken and Russian soldiers have failed to reach. His words carried the weight of verified battlefield reality. In the past 30 days, Ukrainian forces have liberated over 340 square kilometers of our territory across multiple fronts. 12 settlements have been returned to Ukrainian control. Our soldiers are not just defending, they are advancing. These words are not propaganda. They are not a leader's attempt to manufacture morale from nothing. They are the documented echo of a massive territorial shift that has stunned military observers worldwide. When the liberation operations across all active fronts are aggregated, the picture transforms entirely. In February and March 2026, Ukrainian forces conducted localized counteroffensives that recaptured between 18 and 24 settlements across the Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Kherson axes, small in individual scale, enormous in cumulative effect. On this matter, a historic admission came from Taras Shmut, president of the Come Back Alive Foundation and member of Ukraine's Defense Management Agency Supervisory Board. Shmut, whose analytical credibility is respected across both Ukrainian and Western defense establishments, made a statement that sent shockwaves through the analytical community. Shmut said, "For the first time in many months, perhaps years, we are liberating more territory than we are losing. Russia has lost the mud war." But this victory extends far beyond moral superiority. The shift in the war's trajectory is carved into Institute for the Study of War Maps and operational reports with the clarity of a surgical incision. Along the entire front line stretching from Zaporizhzhia to Kupiansk, the spring thaw has changed everything for Kyiv and ended everything for Moscow's offensive ambitions. To translate this strategic shift into operational reality, Ukrainian ground forces struck first and struck hard at the points of maximum Russian vulnerability. In the Zaporizhzhia sector, the 82nd Air Assault Brigade and the 95th Air Assault Brigade, operating under the direct command of General Alexander Apostol, launched a coordinated offensive along the Orikhiv-Polowy axis during the second week of March. The timing was deliberate. Russian armored reserves that might have responded were immobilized by ground conditions. Russian artillery batteries that should have provided covering fire were being systematically hunted by Ukrainian drone teams. The offensive struck into a defensive line that was theoretically strong on paper but operationally hollow. Despite fierce initial resistance from elements of the Russian 42nd Motorized Rifle Division, Ukrainian paratroopers drove Russian forces back beyond the administrative boundary of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, a line that Russian commanders had publicly declared would never be conceded. Thousands of Russian soldiers were forced into a retreat that their own command infrastructure could not coordinate, across terrain that their own vehicles could not traverse. This operation was not a raid. It was the single most consequential maneuver in unlocking the entire Zaporizhzhia front. The closure of the Orikhiv-Polohi corridor severed the primary axis along which Russian forces had planned their westward advance toward the Dnipro River. This route was the main artery sustaining Russia's southern operational concept, the theoretical drive to split Ukraine along the river line and isolate the western half of the country. That artery is now severed. The blood of Russian logistics no longer flows through it. But the bleeding did not stop at Dnipropetrovsk. South of Zaporizhzhia, the 132nd Separate Reconnaissance Battalion of the 7th Rapid Reaction Corps, operating under the tactical designation CG-132, executed a penetration of Russian defensive positions in the Oleksandrivsky direction that caught the defending garrison entirely unprepared. Trenches that had been occupied for months were breached in under 4 hours. Russian defensive positions that had consumed weeks of engineering effort and millions of rubles in construction materials were overrun by soldiers who understood the terrain better than the occupiers ever could. This maneuver accomplished something of profound operational significance. It placed Russian southern logistics lines under direct Ukrainian artillery observation and fire. Russian supply convoys attempting to reach forward positions in the Melitopol direction now travel roads that are registered in Ukrainian fire control systems. Every truck, every fuel tanker, every ammunition carrier moves through a corridor of calculated destruction. This situation leaves Russian soldiers with precisely one rational option, which is to abandon their corroding weapons and deteriorating equipment and FLE. More than 50,000 Russian troops face this identical calculus across the Zaporizhzhia operational zone and its immediate surroundings. Their commanders refuse to authorize withdrawal, but the troops themselves are trapped between the institutional punishment for retreat and the physical reality of Ukrainian firepower, spring mud, and collapsing supply lines. The crisis consuming Russia's southern front has metastasized eastward into the Donetsk Oblast with devastating speed. Since the beginning of 2026, Ukrainian armed forces have been conducting systematic operations to reclaim key positions around Pokrovsk, Chasiv Yar, and the industrial zones east of the contact line. Today, the situation has become dramatically more promising for Kyiv. The evidence arrives in successive operational reports, each one another nail in the coffin of Russian offensive capability. The first proof came from the Phoenix unit of the Ukrainian State Border Guard Service. This formation, operating in a sector where Russian armor had previously moved with relative impunity, destroyed 2 Russian T-72B3 main battle tanks in a single 48-hour period using coordinated FPV drone strikes. The operational footage follows an identical and now familiar pattern. Ukrainian drone operators first targeted the tank's running gear, tracks, and road wheels, immobilizing the vehicles in terrain from which self-recovery was impossible. Once stationary, the tanks became what every tanker fears most: fixed targets. Secondary strikes penetrated the thinner upper armor, detonating stored ammunition. The turrets of both vehicles were found separated from their hulls by the force of the internal explosions. What do these precision drone strikes mean for the Donetsk front? They mean the death of Russian armored doctrine. Russian tank warfare is predicated on rapid armored movement. It is the concentrated application of mobile firepower to overwhelm defensive positions. However, in spring conditions, this speed does not merely diminish, it evaporates. Tanks designed for 50 kilometers per hour dashes across open ground are crawling at walking pace through mud that reaches their lower hull plates. Combined with Ukraine's precision strike capability, Russia's armored advantage is not simply reduced, it is inverted. Every tank destroyed marginally reduces Russian maneuverability in the east. Every lost vehicle narrows the available retreat routes by another fraction. But aggregate these fractions across weeks and months, and the result is not a gradual decline. It is the collapse of an entire doctrinal framework. This collapse deepened catastrophically when Ukrainian forces turned their attention to Russia's fire support architecture. The operation was reported by United 24 media with a confirmed date of March 12th. A special detachment operating within the 20th Army Corps' area of responsibility, Lazar's group, deployed large hexacopter drones designated Baba Yaga to hunt Russian BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket systems operating southeast of Pokrovsk. The footage documents an extraordinary pursuit. The first Russian Grad, a vehicle carrying 40 122mm rockets capable of saturating an area the size of several football fields with explosive fragmentation, attempts to flee along a forest road after detecting the approaching drone. It accelerates. It swerves. It tries to reach the cover of a tree canopy. None of it matters. The Baba Yaga drone, operating with the patience of a machine that carries no adrenaline, matches every maneuver and delivers a precision munition directly onto the vehicle's rocket rack. The initial detonation triggers a sympathetic explosion of the remaining ammunition. The Grad and the 40 rockets it carried transform into a column of fire visible from 3 kilometers away. Russian soldiers are subsequently filmed attempting to salvage the burning vehicle. This effort is documented as futile. Within minutes, the same drone unit locates a second Grad, this one parked and presumably awaiting orders, and destroys it with identical precision. 2 Grad systems, 80 rockets, an entire battalion's fire support capability, eliminated by a drone that costs Lysemwers less than a single one of those rockets. But the Ukrainian armed forces were not finished dismantling Russia's combat architecture in Donetsk. In a subsequent operation confirmed by the First Separate Special Purpose Center, Ukrainian drone teams located and destroyed the radar station and TEL launcher of a Russian S-300 PM air defense system operating in the rear area of the Donetsk front. The strategic significance of this strike cannot be overstated. The SS-300 PM system is the backbone of Russia's medium to long-range air defense network. Its radar station provides the electromagnetic eyes that detect incoming aircraft, cruise missiles, and drones at ranges exceeding 200 kilometers. Its launcher carries the missiles that turn detection into destruction. Remove both, and you do not merely damage the air defense system. You blind it. You create a gap, a corridor of electromagnetic darkness through which Ukrainian strike-cast assets can operate with dramatically reduced risk.